Hey, welcome back to Taji's midweek wrap-up. Hey you guys, welcome back to Taji's World of Books, and as you heard, this is my weekly mid wrap-up. I'm going to film this in some clips because I just want to get hot off the press the books that I've read to you, and then other things that I read I'll add in. And so without further ado, let's get into it. So I'm going to talk about the love hypothesis just briefly because you're going to hear more about, if you hear crinkling, my son is over there eating a bag of chips right now. You're going to hear more about this book on Charles Books on Stereo's channel. This is our book club pick of the month. We're going to record that video today, but Charles is going to put it up on his channel in whenever he does. So go over there and check that out. So this is a really cute story. I surprisingly really enjoyed it. It was entertaining. It was fascinating. You know, it had some of the tropes in it that I typically don't like, which is fake dating. I don't like fake dating because invariably in a fake dating situation, somebody always catches feelings, and invariably they never want to violate the agreement of the fake dating, and so they never want to come clean about how they feel. So I hate that. I just don't like it. And this had the fake dating. There's a little bit of an age gap situation in here as well, and it was a little bit of taboo in the sense that, you know, she is a PhD student and he is a professor, and usually that's kind of like a no-go, but because he doesn't have any involvement in any of her research projects and he is not involved in her committee or her dissertation, he doesn't have any sort of power over her in that respect. It's not frowned upon to do that. But I absolutely loved, outside of those things, I absolutely love this story. It's very interesting. So the story is about Olive, and Olive is basically, she seems kind of spectrum-y. She seems like possibly asexual. I often get the terms confused. She is the type of person who has no interest in relationships or sexual encounters of any kind. She has to have a very intense emotional relationship with the person in order for her to want to move forward with anything else. And that's exactly what her and Carson develop over this fake dating type situation that they're in. Now, it's very interesting. There is a power differential, in my opinion, in this book, and she is very conscious, and they are very conscious of him being a professor and she being the student, that he has the power. But in fact, the power differential exists in the reverse, that she holds all the power in the relationship, and anything that she wants, he does, and he kind of goes along with, and, you know, really seeks her permission for everything because he does not want to appear as though he's taking advantage of a vulnerable student. But I love the quirkiness of the characters. I love the STEM involvement in science, and so therefore there's a very nerdy, sort of intelligent component. I guess maybe I identify with these characters so much, having been a graduate student in a doctoral program and been in school, in graduate school, for like 13 years, including my master's degree. And so I understand what it's like doing studies and research and running statistics and working late hours and working with other doctoral students and trying to get grants. And I know what that's all like. And so I identified with these characters so much because I can remember being in research labs. I can remember working very long hours. I remember writing proposals. I remember writing my dissertation. I remember how important my committee chair was and how much pull, you know, academic professors really have over your life. And I remember, you know, the thought about going into academia versus going into like the public sector and what that was all like. And so I struggled through that. And so this I identified with, and I love quirky, nerdy characters that the angst really comes from this internal sense of trying to figure out oneself and to establish who one is, whilst trying to figure out your professional career and professional development. I also think their love story was very sweet, and I think that it was very, it was just really appropriate. It was about subtly falling in love with somebody over time through getting to know them and getting to know their emotional baggage and know who they are and what they bring to the table, respecting them professionally as well as, you know, from an emotional standpoint. And so I just thought that this book, I loved so much of this. Now the steam level is not that high. It's not a very steamy book. It could pass as a new adult, like it has a little bit of a steam in it, but I absolutely loved it. Would I read other things by this author? Absolutely. Would I read the book number 2 that's going to come out, which I absolutely know is coming out, and it seems like it's going to be about Holden and Malcolm, and that's the direction I think it's going. We'll see. Absolutely. I would love to read more by her. So this is, I was really happy about this. I think I'm going to give this a 4.75, but if you want to hear more of my thoughts about it, please go over to Charles's Books on Stereo channel and check that out. Okay, so the next book that I want to talk about is a longly anticipated, and I've got to give credit where credit is due. Jen from the Book Refuge, I'll link her channel down below. This is a beloved series of hers. She talks about it all the time, and as a result, I had previously watched the show, and I typically don't do this. If I'm gonna read a book and watch a show, I read the books first, then I watch the show. Because if I do it the other way, it kind of messes with me a little bit, like such as with Game of Thrones, it just messed the whole thing up. But in this case, I didn't. And I heard Jen talk so much about it, and I know that I love the show. I said, I'm going to go ahead and get these books, and I'm going to go down the Diana Gabaldon's The Outlander path. And Jen, like I said, Jen talked so much about it that I said, I'm just going to go ahead and do it. And so finally, I was like, you know what? Why not? And so I picked up book 1, The Outlander. And boy, oh boy, am I happy that I have done this. And if you haven't heard of this series, you're living under a rock, and I want to pull you out from under that rock and bring you on to the bandwagon. And this is absolutely an amazing love story. It is not classified as a love story, but for me, there is a heavy love component to this book. It reads to me, this is to me, who does not like historical fiction or historical romance. It reads like a historical romance to me, but I don't know if it's qualified as that or classified as that. I think it's probably classified more as fiction or women's fiction. But it is about a woman who basically goes back in, and I want to call her Sassenach, and her name is not Sassenach, and I just, oh my God, I cannot believe that what is her name? Claire. Ah! So Claire basically is married, and she's in 1945, and she has a husband named Frank, and they have been separated for 6 years, and to get married for 6 years, but separated during that time because of war, and she was working during the war, but together for 6 months. And they have come together, and they are in Inverness on a holiday to reconnect after having been apart because of the war situations, and he was in the war and she was working as a nurse, and so they've come back together. Whilst in Inverness, she goes up to these stones. Frank, her husband, is very interested in folklore and history and his family history, and has traced, you know, his lineage back to Captain Jack Black and like all of this. So she knows a lot. She's absorbed a lot of historical information about the British Isles and about the Scots and about the, you know, the Jacobites and, you know, the various battles that have occurred. And so she has all this information with her. She goes up to these stones that they had visited the previous day. They have gone to these stones and kind of, you know, was doing a bit of sightseeing and checking it out and learning about the history around it. It is obviously a very magical site. And they go back to the B&B or boarding house that they're staying in. They find that there were some plants there. Claire says, I really wanted to get those plants. He goes, why don't you go back up and get them? So she decides that she's going to go back up on another day to go get collect these plants because they have medicinal and herbal values. And she does that. And while she's there, she hears this buzzing and bee sound. And she touches the stone, and I'm condensing, and when she touches the stone, she is pulled in, and next thing you know, she is in a different time, in a different place. And she is accosted by her husband Frank's 5th-time grandfather, Jack Randall, who is an absolute monster, and her adventures ensue from there. And to make a long story short, she is rescued from him by Highlanders, the Scots clans, the Mackenzies. And she embarks on an adventure with the Mackenzies. And while she's with the Mackenzies, she is, brought back to their laird. She is, basically found to be a very significant healer and is respected in their time frame and is accepted into their clans. And ultimately, because of the various adventures and everything that happens with her, she is, married off to Jamie. And it's about her relationship with Jamie and everything that they go through. And everything that Jamie and Claire go through serves a purpose, and it serves to strengthen their relationship, and it serves to strengthen their understanding of each other and the interactions that they're having in this time frame, and how different her thinking is from his. He's from a different culture. She's from the UK. He is a Scotsman. She's from, the 1900s. He's from the, 1700s. It's just very, very different. But I gotta tell you, this book is so rich with so many experiences of different cultural experiences. There also is different ways in which women are treated and women are viewed and women are respected, and how Jamie respects her as his wife, as his mate, as his partner. There is an instance in which Claire disrespects and doesn't listen to something that Jamie has told her to do, and it gets the entire clan in trouble and puts them at risk. And as a result of that, he spanks her. And he does it in a way that is to teach her a lesson. And that is a very controversial scene in this book, because it's viewed by some as abusive and it's viewed by others as, I understand his explanation, I understand her explanation, I understand why this happened, I understand the need for it, I understand the sort of BDSM underpinning, but it brings up controversy. I, on one hand, completely understand what happened and why it went down. I understand Claire's response to it. I understand Jamie's explanation of it. It's so rich. This book is so rich. I never thought in a million years that I would love it as much as I do. This is also a book that brings in, for the first time that I have read, is it the first book? Well, let me say, the first time I've read it in this way, a male rape, and the community's response to this rape and how they perceive it and how it's handled and how the rapist went about coercing and pulling this rape out of this man, and how he responds and how he feels about his manhood as a result of being assaulted. And because it wasn't forcefully extracted, it was coerced and manipulated out of him, that it leaves so much more of a psychological indent and damage. And it was handled with such great care and ease that I'm just floored at the type of writing and the direction and the recovery and the trauma. And like I said, the community's response to it. This book is phenomenal. Like, I gave this a 5 out of 5 star for sure. It was captivating and interesting. The audiobook is really, really good. It draws your attention. It holds your attention. You're interested in what's going on. It's not action-packed. It's not constantly like bam, 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 like stuff going on all the time, and your heart's not ready. It's not all of that. It's just a steady, slow building of a relationship that's beautiful, that's strong, that is like, I know you don't want to marry me, and I know that you're doing your duty because you gave your word, but the one thing I ask of you is honesty and trust. Don't lie to me. Be honest to me always. what better foundation could you ever build a relationship on? And then the struggling that Claire has with being married in her generation and then skipping generations 400 years later and being married again. And what does that mean? And what is that like? And are you being unfaithful to your first husband? And how does she reconcile that? And what does she do with that? And so there's a lot of struggle and a lot of conflict, internal conflict about guilt surrounding around, you know, being married and then remarrying, but not really having much of a choice and having to do it out of survival and having to do it to survive. And what are the things that you do to survive? And what are you willing to do to survive? A whole heck of a lot. Like, especially if you know that it means your safety, and if you know that you're going to care about the person anyway. So there's so much there. So I'm excited to say that I'm going to be going on to, and I'm sure that there's a ton of other things that I could say that I have forgotten to say, or that I'm not saying, or that I'm not expressing well, but that's not the intention of this. The intention is to give you an idea of how good this daggone book is and how beautiful their relationship is, and to encourage you to read it, and to say that if you do read this book, you will not be disappointed. And I am absolutely going to continue on with the series. I'm going to read as many books as I can up to their new release of book 9. And then I think I'm going to go back and watch the series again, because I really loved the series and I loved Jamie. Like, I thought Matthew Claremont from Discovery of Witches was like my ultimate book husband. We're talking about husbands, not boyfriends. Listen, we're talking about marrying material. I thought Matthew Claremont was like, I was like, I'm marrying Matthew Claremont. Like, he is everything and then some. And then I met Jamie. And now I'm like, Jamie, Matthew. Jamie, Matthew. I haven't decided yet. After I get through the series, I'll let you know. So, you guys, that's all I have for today. We're going to jump over to the next clip, and I think that's going to be a fly in the ember? I think it's a fly in the ember. We'll see. I'll see you over there. Bye. Hi, everybody. So I am back to talk about, I just finished the second book, Dragonfly in the Ember, in the Outlander series, and guys, I just didn't have any idea as to, like I said, I've watched the shows and I loved Claire and Jamie in the shows. The books are so much more rich and so much more depth, right? Like, books are expansive, right? Because you have more pages to put in more words, right? Whereas shows are constrictive and contractive because you have to take out stuff. But they still did a great job in telling the story. And so this book was like, towards the end of it, like, I was just sobbing, because this is a love story that transcends time. So in the second book, this is, you know, in the first book, in the Outlander, we see Claire stumbles through the stones. She finds this Outlander, Jamie Fraser, and it's their love story and their coming of age story, right? In the second book, she then is telling her story backwards. So she is back with, Frank, and she has her daughter, Brianna, but now she's telling her story 20 years later as it was told. So in the beginning, Frank has passed away, and she has returned with her daughter, Brianna, to Scotland to retrace steps. And she's retracing steps because she wants to tell her daughter, Brianna, the story of her father, Jamie Fraser. And so she's telling it as it's told. So the first part of the book is them traveling back to Scotland, being in Scotland, her telling Roger and Brianna the story of what happened, and Brianna not believing her and not thinking that this is even possible, but then really helping her to come to understand, the secrets that Claire has held for 20 years, the epic love story that transcends time between Claire and Jamie, the secrecy and the intrigue of Charles Stuart with the French court, and that led to the Highland Rebellion and the uprising, and, the desperate attempts that because Claire is really torn, and I like to think of it as like everything that Jamie and Claire go through serves to strengthen their relationship. But we forget that she was desperately in love with Frank before she left, before she fell through the stones. And so now, as we move from this book, you know, at the end of this, and you go into Voyager, you start to see that she had a relationship with Frank as well, and she loved him as well. We don't often talk about Frank, and Frank gets, like, you know, an underscore to Jamie because Jamie is so magnificent and magnanimous, right? But she loved Frank as well, and she really was torn between the two of them. And so you've got this woman who is very modernized and intelligent and brilliant and feisty and just a unique, special person who is thrown back into like 1745 France, you know, I'm sorry, Scotland, then France and all the places that they travel to. And so how does she bring that knowledge, but at the same time be reminiscent of a woman and a wife during that time period and what that was like? I also really loved, I absolutely loved at the end of this book, or towards the end, when the Highland uprising is occurring. So like we're in part 6, I believe. And, you know, when they're getting ready to go on to the Battle of Culloden, and I think it's Dougal Mackenzie, you know, basically hears, because Claire is trying to work with Jamie to figure out how to avoid Culloden, because she knows what a massacre this is going to be. And she is so worried that Jamie is going to lose his life. And they are starving. There are no resources. It is a really desperate time. And so she basically has a conversation with Jamie, and she says, like, should we kill, you know, Charles? And they basically come to the conclusion that they shouldn't, but Dougal Mackenzie hears this and basically is going to kill Claire, and Jamie is not going to allow that to happen. And so he kills his foster father. And as a result of that, he says, I have to answer to this crime. So basically, I've got to see to my wife. I've got to take care of my wife. And so in a desperate situation, that's when he brings her back to the stones and is like, you've got to go back. But I think the part that, like, just touches my heart so much is she said, I'm going to die with you. You cannot send me back. I'm here with you. I love you, Jamie. I cannot do this. And he said, you don't do it for me. You do it for the child that you carry. And she says, how do you know? And he said, from the time that I've been with you, you've never not had your monthly courses and you haven't bled in 46 days. And she just is like, what? And he goes through and takes an accounting of her body. And he goes, and even though we're starving and you're skinny as all get out, he's like, I know. And he, like, basically, you know, talks about her breasts, and he talks about, like, the changes that he's taken stock or taken notice of in her body. And to know that he is so attentive and conscientious of what's going on with his wife and is so willing to make that sacrifice. He says, like, you have to go because the only thing that's going to be left of me is this child, and that child has to survive, and you have to survive. And it is like ripping your heart out. Like, it's literally ripping your heart out, because you just know, like, if you've ever been in love like that, how do you just walk away? You don't. You can't. It's torturous. And then to know that you've got to stumble back through the stones and then take stock with your husband who has missed you for 3 years and basically say, like, here's where I've been, and oh, by the way, I'm pregnant with another man's child. And to have him accept you back and to have him raise that child as his own is like, Frank is a man to take your hat off to. Frank is a man to say, like, you are a man's man, and they don't make men like you anymore. So, like, it's so powerful in so many ways, and it speaks to so many sides of the human condition. It speaks to war, it speaks to the evil things that men do, but it speaks to the beauty that men do. And that, when I say men, I mean mankind, people. you know, and it also speaks to this relationship. For example, even Jack Randall, who we've hated in Outlander, like the first book, we hated Jack Randall. He was a sick, perverted bastard for sure. His brother Alex, he loved beyond measure and was willing to do whatever it took to ensure that his brother's will and wishes were protected. And even if that meant marrying the woman that his brother loved so she could have a position of standing and not be ruined. And to ensure that Alex Randall's child, who ultimately Frank's Randall lineage is born from, which Frank believes that it comes from Captain Jack Black, and it doesn't, he was willing to do that. So within one person, you can be evil and you can be good, all in one. And so this book is, I understand why I love the series so much, and I understand why I love, and then also, it's not just the love story, which is epic, right? It's also about history. It's about learning all of the different, I didn't know what Jacobites were, and I don't still think I fully understand, because I'm not a Brit, right? Like, I don't fully understand what it is to be a Jacobite. So I don't understand all those dynamics, but you know, to also understand and hear about what it was like during that century, to live, to be a woman, to travel, to, you know, be with your husband, you know, all of those things. It really, like, it's almost like pulling back the curtain of history and stepping through time and living every aspect of what it's like to be a Klansman, and every aspect of what it's like to be in the Scottish Highlands, and every aspect of like what it's like to be in France, or to like have different ideas about things and have to worry about being summoned and tried as a witch and what all that is. And I mean, I could speak for days and days about this book. It is an absolutely wonderful piece of history that is vast and has a lot of depth and a lot of richness that you don't get in most romance novels. Like, you just don't. And I think that I will keep this as part of my collection to read over time as a historical piece of work, because I think it's that beautiful and it has that much loveliness to it. And I'm super excited that I, you know, took Jen's advice and went down the plunge on this, because it is well worth every step of the way. I'm loving, loving, loving. And I'm not even doing this justice. I just am not. There's so much that we could talk about and say about this series and about this book and about the show. But having said, suffice it for now to say that this is a 5 out of 5 star. It is absolutely wonderful. If you haven't read it, I think that you should. I'm starting The Voyager now, which is book 3 in this series, and I am doing it with gusto and excitement, and the audiobooks are phenomenal, and I just love to hear the Highland accents and the pronunciation of, you know, Frasier, and, you know, the way that you say it in their sort of Gaelic accent. It's amazing, amazing, amazing. So having said that, you guys, that is all that I have for today. And, you know, I always ask you to please hit the like button, because it helps me with the algorithm. Hit the bell notification button so you can get notified every time I upload a new video, which is every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And that is all that I have for today, and I look forward to seeing you in my next video.